What is up, you guys? I hope you're all doing well. I'm Tony Fuentes, welcome back to my channel, and today we're turning to the LX series, and the profile that we're going to analyze today is David Oliva's profile on Instagram. Now, David Olivas is a photographer, a Spanish writer, and also a DP in cinematography. So he's very experienced and his style is quite unique. So let's jump into his style on Instagram, then we're going to go into Lightroom, create a preset, and apply it to different scenarios to see how it performs. So let's jump into analyzing his style. So this is David's profile on Instagram, David Olivas, just like that, if you want to go and support him. As we can see, he's a Sony ambassador, so he's very well represented. Now here he is with his big camera on field, taking some very nice movies, I suggest, or documentaries or something like that. And immediately, if we scroll down, what we can see is that his style is basically bichromatic. We have very nice blues, very dark blues, they're not quite teal blues. And then we have these orangey vibes. Basically, we're desaturating every single color but the blues and the oranges and yellow. So his style is very bichromatic in that sense. Everything in his style is very consistent, but still it's a very stylized look. Here we can see this image. If we zoom in, immediately we can see that this little hat that this girl has is completely desaturated. It has no color except the blue that has been added into the shadows. Now, talking about the blue that's been added in the shadows, that's done in the color grading part within Lightroom, which used to be split toning. And then in the highlights, as you can see in the smoke or the steam rising from her vape, and in the lights, and also in the white stripes in the street, everything in the highlights is tending towards this yellowish vibe. So we have to remember that shadows and midtones are tending towards a bluish, dark blue color because it's not a teal, and then the highlights are turning towards the oranges. So it's not quite a teal and orange or typical teal and orange look. It's more of a dark blue towards an orange. Then one thing we can see that the scarf over here, which I think is yellow, is that it has a bit of luminance, so it really pops up a lot in the image. Every other color is completely desaturated. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that most of these images that we're going to see are shot whether it be at blue hour or at night, where those bluish tones really come into play and really blending with the scenery. If he would shoot and edit these types of images in, let's say, in midday, it wouldn't look quite as good because of those bluish tones, or those coldish tones don't go with the direct sunlight. Now here we have this set of images in Venice, and as you can see, this one is in an overcast day, a very cloudy day. And one thing that we can notice talking about the exposure is how we lose so much information in the shadows. Now the blacks, they are pure blacks as we compare it to the black on the Instagram interface. They are pure blacks, so there's no fading out of the blacks. But then we can't really see the difference between his arm, where it ends, and where the chest starts. So we're losing so much information in the shadows. That's because he's bringing him down in the tone curve and also in the basic corrections. But then the highlights, he's also bringing him down. So we have information in the highlights, but we don't have information in the shadow. So that's the thing we have to remember. So again, everything is desaturated. We can see that hint of warmish tones in the highlights over here in the bandana, or I don't know what it's called, that this woman has. Other than that, everything is completely blue. Now in this next image, this split toning that we have is very apparent. Here we can see those warmish tones in the highlights, in the sky, and also in every single part of these facades that has a bit of highlights. Remember that Lightroom divides your image automatically into shadows, into midtones, and into highlights. And here we can see that everything that Lightroom is considering to be in the highlight realm is turning towards these orangey tones. Also in the poles over here, it's very apparent how he's desaturating these poles, which maybe they are red, maybe they are blue, and then the whites have this very apparent orangey vibe. Everything else is completely desaturated. We don't have any greens, we don't have any magentas, any purples, and I think we don't have, or well, the blues are almost completely desaturated. Everything is done in the HSL, that desaturation, and then we're adding those bluish shadows and those warmish highlights. As we know, people, or the gondoliers, I don't know how it's pronounced in English, in Spanish is gondoleros, and they have a white and red striped shirts, and over here the reds are tending towards the more like brick-like colors, more orange. We can do this in HSL by altering the tones of the reds, but also in camera calibration by altering the red primary. Now talking about camera calibration, we can see that in most of his images the skin tones are tending towards the oranges, similar to the styles that we've already analyzed, like Bob Salas or Benji Vilena's style. I'll link it up here in the cards in case you want to check them out. Here we can see this beautiful little lady with these orangey tones really starting to pop up in some parts of her face. Now it's not too exaggerated to the point where it's completely unnatural, but they do have a very nice orangey tint in the skins. Now once again, everything is completely desaturated. I don't know if the jacket of the mother, maybe it's a military green. It's also completely desaturated, so greens are completely gone in his style. And again, every single other color that we would be able to see in the background is again desaturated, then just leaving us with this warmish tone in the highlights, or here again, warmish tone. Maybe these buns are white, and again, that bluish tint in the shadows and midtones. So the story repeats itself in every single image, particularly the ones that have a lot of shadows in them, everything tending towards those bluish tones. We can also reinforce those bluish tones in the temperature tab, but those reddish tones are tending towards the bricks, and also they are basically the only other color that really stands out. Now this image in particular is something that I was looking for, an image that's more correctly exposed. It's not completely in the night where the shadows are very dominant. Here we have a more compensated image. So we have some highlights. Immediately we can see that the highlights, for example, the blue shirt, the white shirt of the nun over here is completely yellow. That's just reaffirming to me that in the color grading, he adds a warmish tone into the highlights, and the shadows, as we can see over here and every other part, are tending towards the bluish tones. Now we can control how much Lightroom decides to be in the shadows and how much in the highlights and midtones by altering the balance tab that we have in, or the fusion tab as well, that we have in color grading. Now, if you don't know what this is, just check out my tutorial on color grading where I'll go in depth into that tool and how to dominate it. But once again, those highlights in the warmish tones, those shadows in the bluish tones, and then the skin tones are tending towards these very nice orangey vibes. And finally, we have that exposure that we were looking for. Now, I don't see any big film grain added. Maybe this is just product of the ISO on the image. And then also I don't see much clarity, just a bit of clarity, not too much texture. It's a very nice image indeed. Now again, we keep scrolling down, the story continues to repeat itself. I just want to go further down because everything here is completely blue. We already know how to do that. We're going to apply it in Lightroom. Then we go down where the style started to create. Here we can see that the blues just start to give away in some sense. Now this image is basically the epiphany. In this case, we have a bit more towards the teal colors in the blues. This is prior to the images that we saw already, but again we can see those oranges in the skin, a bit unnatural. But yeah, we basically have those two colors only in this image, just oranges and yellows and blues. Yeah, if we go way back, his style was a bit more teal and orange than the most recent photos. Here we have that teal color and those very orangey skin tones, and everything else is desaturated. Now in the more recent images, if we go back once again to the top, the blue is a lot more darker and not towards the teal colors, it's more towards the dark blues. So I think I have everything I need to replicate this style. And remember that the purposes of these tutorials aren't to steal styles here and there. They're more so for you guys to understand how to achieve these styles and how to dominate Lightroom, each slider, what each slider does in Lightroom to achieve certain looks. And in particular with styles which are this stylized and this specific, they're quite hard to nail down. So let's jump into Lightroom and edit this. Okay, so once in Lightroom, we have all these images. Most of them I've already edited, and none of them are as good as his photographs, I have to say. But they're in the urban scene, and some of them are in dark scenarios, which will really work with his style. And some of them are in overcast days, and others are just basically at night or in the metro, just trying to replicate his style. So let's start off by editing one where we have some subjects in him. So for example, this one, and we're going to go to the develop tab. Now I just want to amp up the exposure just a bit so we can see what we're working with. Remember that the temperature, tint, exposure, and contrast will depend on each image. So I like to leave them at 0. Those are the values that we're going to adjust to adjust the preset to other scenarios or lighting scenarios. So let's start off by editing the exposure of this image. Now I have to remember you guys that the preset that we're going to create is going to be added into the Edit preset pack. If you want to support me, the desktop and the mobile version, there's 2 versions of that preset pack, so don't get confused. So it's a way you can support me and ensure I don't starve to death, along with every single other preset or LUT that I create. The shop is linked down below, so check it out. So first of all, let's get the exposure right for this image. We wanted an image with a lot of information in the highlights, but a lot of lost information in the shadows. So first of all, highlights, we're going to pull them down so we have more information in the skies. Immediately we can see how the skies and the brightest parts of the image start to really pop. This is a great manner where you can play around with the slider, just move them up and down until you find what you're looking for. So I'm going to go to the negatives in this case, just around the minus 65%. And then the shadows, we're going to pull them down. Normally I would pull them up so we have a lot more information. In this case, I'm going to pull them down so we have that very nice contrast, and we'll start losing some information in the shadows. In white, again, affect the brightest parts of the image. Just going to pull them down all the way to negatives and then minus 85%. And then the blacks, I'm just going to leave them like that, because if we pull them back too much, well, the image is a lot too contrasty. If we pull them up, we're achieving a lot of information in the shadows, which is not what we want either. Now, presence, remember that I didn't notice any clarity or any texture. Maybe I would add a bit of clarity. Remember, you can move the sliders just by dragging with your mouse. You can also insert the precise number over here, or you can put your mouse over the name, and then with a plus on your keyboard, you can move up by 5% and the negative with a negative 5%. So I'm just going to leave it at 5. Just to add a bit more clarity into this image. Next up, the tone curve. Now, if you don't know how the tone curve works completely, just check out my tutorial up here. It's an in-depth tutorial on how it works and everything you can do it. In that tutorial, I really cover even the RGB channels. So yeah, check it out. Now, in this case, it's going to be a very simple edit in the tone curve. Just going to create a point in the shadows and bring it down below the diagonal to create this arc, just to add a lot more contrast. And again, what we're doing is just bringing down a bit of the highlights, bringing down the midtones, and adding a lot more shadows with a loss of information. Now, if you wanted some faded out blacks, we can always pull up this point over here, and as you can see, they're faded out. I'm just gonna leave it very contrasty, just like that in this case. Okay, so now we have an exposure which is very contrasty, losing a lot of information in the shadows and bringing down the highlights. Now we're gonna jump into the color grading part. First of all, HSL. Now in HSL, remember that we want to desaturate most of the colors. So first of all, magentas and purples, we didn't see any of them in his photos. Then the blues, I am going to desaturate them. We did see a lot of blue, but most of it was added in the color grading part. So I'm going to desaturate quite a bit the blues. Just going to go to the minus 60 or so, something like that. The aquas, I'm going to desaturate them just a bit less, maybe to a negative 55. And again, the greens, I'm just going to desaturate them quite a bit, go all the way down to the minus 60s, yeah, something like that. Now, yellows normally control, the yellows on our images, but also the vivid greens in every part of vegetation that we have on our image. A lot of the greens are actually in the yellow realm. So I'm going to desaturate just as well, and just bring it down around a minus 41. And then the oranges and reds, well, we want to do the opposite. We want to bring them up, so we're creating that color contrast. Just bring up the reds around the plus 12, and then the oranges around the plus 8. So they're a bit more saturated. We can click this button on off to see what we're done. As you can see, the blues are disappearing from our image. We don't want them to be in them. And the skin tones really start to pop up with that saturation that we're adding. Now, next up in hue, we're just going to alter a bit of the colors. For example, the reds and the oranges, remember, we want them towards the brick oranges, so we don't want them towards the pinks. So the reds, I'm just going to pull it up just ever so slightly towards the brick-like oranges over here, and the oranges as well. We're going to go to the same realm around the minus 20, minus 19, and then the yellows as well. What we want to do is not towards the emerald greens. Again, we want them towards the negatives, as well as the greens. In this case, going to go all the way down. We don't want them towards these colors. We want them towards the burned down greens over here, just around a minus 60%. So the image is looking a bit more desaturated, just what we were looking for. Maybe the greens, I would desaturate them just a bit more, just because of the shirt of this guy, almost so it looks like it's black and white. Next up, luminance. Now in the luminance, I'm just going to add a bit more brightness into the oranges and the yellows, just to make them pop and to make that color contrast really more emphatic. Just pull up the up all the way onto plus 18 or more so, and a plus 15, something along those lines, just to bring them up just a bit. As you can see, they really start to pop up. We click this button on and off, we can see what we've done in HSL, and just subtle changes, but it's what we're looking for. Okay, color grading, I'm just gonna skip it. That's gonna be the last part of this edit. I'm just gonna go all the way down to camera calibration and do some minor changes. Now in camera calibration, what we want to do is just really nail down those orangey skin tones that he had. And for that, we're gonna move the red primary and the blue primary. Now, first of all, the red primary, we're gonna go to the plus 100. And as you can see, everything that is yellow or red in the image is being altered. For example, the reds are tend towards the oranges. That's what we want. But the skin tones are a bit too orangey. So for that, I'm just gonna desaturate just a bit every single color that is composed of red in the image, and then I'm just going to add some oranges in the blue tones. Now you may be wondering why I'm adding oranges if I'm altering the blues, and it's just because in camera calibration what we're doing is altering every single color on your image, and every single color of your image is composed, whether it be more quantity of reds of greens, and of blues, the RGB. Every pixel on the image is composed of those three colors that we're altering in camera calibration. Now, if we go to the color wheel up here just momentarily, we can see that opposite to the blues, what we have are the oranges. That's why the teal and orange look is so dominant and so very well looking, because it's a natural color contrast. So by reducing or eliminating a bit of the blues, we're giving way to more oranges to compensate the image. So for example, if we go to the negatives, as we can see, negative 100 on the blues, how the oranges really pop up a lot. Now, I went a bit to the extreme, but just to make the case, guys. So we're gonna go around the halfway, around the 50. I'm gonna leave it at 52%, and then just add a bit more saturation. And as we can see, the skin tones are very orangey now compared to the original, which were a bit more dull and normal. So the skin tones, there we are. Okay, so now we have the oranges on the skin tones. What we're missing now is those warmish tones in the highlights and those bluish tones, which are very dominant of this style. So I'm gonna go up to the color grading, and here, well, basically it was split toning. I already made a tutorial, in-depth tutorial about this. Again, I think I already said it. I'll link up here in the cards just in case. But once again, first of all, shadows. What we're going to do is add a color to the shadows, and I'm just gonna move the slider around until we have a color which is between the teal color, we don't want a mint color, and between the purples, we don't want a purple color either. So I'm just gonna leave it at the 222. And then the saturation, I don't want to go to extreme. As you can see, immediately everything in this image, because it's in the shadow part of the realm, Lightroom is classifying most of this image as shadows. Everything is completely blue. So not too harsh on the saturation. I'm just gonna leave it maybe at 45, I think is a good number. We can further alter this in the future if it's not enough. And then in the highlights, what we want to do is add that warmish tone. So just move the slider around until we have a color that we're happy with. Yeah, something like that. And the saturation, I'm just gonna go around the 40 once again. And as we can see immediately, if we click this button on and off, we can see how those warmish tones start to appear, maybe in the hood or the hoodie, the hat of the model over here, how they appear. And also in the sky, click it off. Sky is blue, now it's orangey. That's what we were looking for. We're creating that color contrast. Now I'm just going to reinforce those bluish tones in the midtones. So I'm going to click on the midtones, type in the same color, which was 222, and the saturation, I'm just going to add it just a bit, maybe to +15. And now we can see by clicking this button on and off how the image is a lot more blue and a lot more like his style. Now it's not too much, because we can still further add some negative temperature, some bluish temperature. And also we can alter the blending tools and also the balance tools. Now, as you may have noticed, color grading depends on the exposure. So Lightroom automatically differentiates what parts of the image are highlights, what parts of the image are midtones and shadows. So if you make your image a lot brighter, for example, for purposes of the example, just bring up the exposure, you can see that those bluish tones start to give way, and we have a lot more of those warmish tones that we added in the highlight parts. So the bluish tones have disappeared, just remaining in the shadow parts. But if we pull the image down, immediately we can see how those warmish tones in the sky disappear and it turns into blue. Everything turns into blue because now Lightroom is saying that this image is more towards the shadows. So that's the thing we have to remember, that color grading depends basically on the exposure on your image, and that's the thing that we can alter down here. So we can alter how much Lightroom decides it to be shadows. For example, we pull the balance down, we're deciding that every single part of the image is shadow. That's why we have now bluish tones also in the highlights. But we can also say that all the image is in the highlight realm. So you can see now that the blues have basically disappeared on our image, and everything, even the shadows, are in the warmish tones. So we don't want to go to the extreme. I'm just going to make this image a lot more in the shadow part. Just bring it down just a bit, and as we can see, the blues really start to kick in. Yeah, something like that. And then the blending, well, blending will depend how much these three values, the midtones, shadows, and highlights, merge with each other, or how rigid they are. So maybe if we're blending in a lot more, you can see that we may be appearing some bluish tones in the skin. If we take it to the negatives or to the 0, it's a bit more rigid into what is defined as shadow, what is defined as midtone, and what is defined as highlights. So I'm just gonna leave it at 0 for purposes of this example. Now, if we want it to be a bit more blue, we can always pull down the temperature. Be very careful by pulling down the temperature that you don't affect the skin tone, just like I did over here. I overdid it. just do it enough so you're not affecting too much the skin tones. But again, here we have this image which is reminiscent of his style with those bluish tones. Now I'm going to save this preset by clicking on the right panel over here, or the left panel, click on the plus sign, create preset, and I'm going to add it into the Light preset pack. Remember that white balancing, exposure, and contrast will depend on each image, so I'm not going to click on them. And now we're going to go to other images, more acquainted to the scenarios that he has on his field to see how the preset performs. Okay, so first of all, we have this image of Tokyo tree over here, or Tokyo Tower, I believe. So I'm just gonna crop it. Again, this image is not perfect. We have a lot of reflections over here. So I'm just gonna apply the preset. As you can see, it's already in the Light preset pack over here as David Olivas. Just gonna click on it, pull up a bit of the exposure. And as we can see, now we have those bluish or dark blue tints into the image, into the shadows. And every single other color is disappearing. For example, the greenish light that we had in these domes has disappeared. We only have those orangey tones and those bluish tones in the shadow. So this image is quite complete. Maybe I would add a bit more contrast just to make the image a lot more contrasty, like his style. Now this one really reminds me of those images that he had in Venice. Of course, they're not the same type of images, but it is a very overcast day where the image is a bit more bright than his usual photos, and we have those warmish tones in the highlights and then those bluish tones in the shadows. Now if we wanted to make this image a lot more blue, we can always pull down the exposure, and as we can see, those warmish tones start to give way towards these bluish tones because the image is turning towards the shadow realm. We can also pull down a bit of the exposure and the temperature just to make this image a lot more blue, but we're retaining those warmish tones in the skin and also those very nice oranges and reddish tones that we really applied. Now this image in the subway kind of reminds me of the image of the nun that we have over here, basically because we have white and then we have shadows, and the exposure is very similar. Now the image is not as good as his photo, obviously, but let's see how the preset performs in this case and if we achieve something similar. Now it's a bit too dark, so I'm just going to pull up a bit of the exposure, and as you can see, the skin tones, particularly, well, she's a bit too white, but we do have those orangey skin tones, but particularly in this subject over here, the oranges really start to pop up. Then we have those warmish tones in the midtones over here. Now in this image, we can see that not everything is being selected as highlight, for example, the mask over here. So what we want to do is go all the way down to the color grading part over here and adjust the balance mode. Just pull the balance up just a bit. And now we can see that the mask is being selected in the warmish tones, but still retaining those bluish tones that we had in the rest of the image. Then we have this image at night. Let's see how the preset performs. And as we can see, in this case, it's not too harsh. What we want to do for this case is maybe pull down a bit of the exposure, pull down a bit of the temperature, and really see how those blues start to kick in. And maybe in this case, maybe add a bit more saturation into the shadow. So maybe add some saturation and maybe to the midtones just a bit more. As you can see, the image is a lot more blue. Maybe darken it up. Yeah, something like that. We can also adjust the exposure by altering the color grading. For example, here we have the luminance. Maybe we wanted to pull down a bit of the shadows. We can just adjust the luminance in the shadows over here, make it a lot more contrasty. We can also do that in the midtones and in the highlights. Okay, this image is quite nice as well, very underexposed, not quite nice. Again, just apply the preset, pull up a bit of exposure to see what we're working with, add a bit more contrast, and as you can see, we have those bluish tones, those oranges really popping up. Maybe in this case, just add a bit more temperature and maybe adjust a bit of the balance just to make the image a bit more warm in the highlights. Yeah, something like that. Now we can see those highlights, orangey highlights, really start to kicking up the top, but still those bluish tones. Maybe the bluish tones aren't quite enough, so maybe I would just add a bit more saturation, just exaggerate it just a bit. Now we can see those bluish tones really start to pop up. Oh, so we have this image which would work quite nice. So let's see the preset. As you can see, everything is very dark, so just gonna add a bit more exposure, and now we can see those bluish tones really contrast with this warmish tones that we have over here. Very nice. Yeah, more towards his style than the previous photos. So that's about it, guys. I think in the color grading part, we did a very nice job. The photography sense, well, the photos that we edited today, they're not quite as good as his. He's a very skilled photographer, and these photos, I took them, I think, 3 years ago. I haven't been to big cities in that time, so yeah, I can forgive myself for that. So if you want to support him, go and follow him on Instagram. If you want to support me, you can also find this preset in the Edit preset pack, which has more than 30 presets that we've created throughout this series, including Peter McKinnon, Alan Palander, Monari, Pau Clavero. All of them that we've analyzed in the series are in that preset pack. So if you want to support me, ensure I don't starve to death, go and check it out. Other than that, guys, I hope you liked the video. If you did, can you please give it a like? It actually makes a difference. Consider subscribing, and remember to share this video with a friend if you think they might find it helpful. Let's make this channel grow. I'm Tony Fuentes. Cheers to all of you. See you in the next one.